The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Riverside Academy's music hall, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. 70-year-old Professor James Henderson stood before the school board, his silver hair catching the sunlight as he gestured emphatically with weathered hands. His colleagues sat in judgment, their faces stern and unmoved. At the center of this storm sat 15-year-old Maya Richardson, her violin resting across her lap like a shield. Her dark eyes remained steady despite the trembling in her hands. The instrument had become part of her soul over the past 3 years, yet today it felt like evidence in a trial. The accusation hung heavy in the air. The board claimed Professor Henderson had wasted school resources by investing time in Maya, a student they believed lacked the proper background for classical music. Their words, though carefully chosen, carried an unmistakable prejudice that made Maya's chest tighten. She remembered the day 3 years ago when everything began. The music room had been empty except for Professor Henderson organizing sheet music. Maya had wandered in during lunch, drawn by sounds she'd heard floating through the hallways. Classical music was foreign to her world, but something about those melodies spoke to a longing she couldn't name. Professor Henderson had noticed her standing in the doorway. Instead of shooing her away, he'd smiled warmly and asked if she wanted to try holding a violin. That simple act of kindness changed everything. The other teachers had laughed when they heard. They told Professor Henderson he was wasting his time, that Maya would never master such a sophisticated instrument. Some even suggested he'd offered her lessons as some misguided social experiment. Their jokes were barely veiled cruelty, but Professor Henderson never wavered. He saw something in Maya that others refused to see, pure, raw talent waiting to be shaped. The early days were difficult. Maya's fingers bled from pressing the strings. Her shoulder ached from holding the instrument. She lived in a neighborhood where classical music was considered pretentious, where her friends teased her for trying to be something she wasn't. But Professor Henderson met her every Tuesday and Thursday after school, patient and encouraging, never doubting her potential. He taught her more than music. He taught her that excellence knows no boundaries, that passion and dedication matter more than where you come from. He shared stories of his own struggles as a young musician, of the times he'd been told he wasn't good enough, of the teacher who believed in him when no one else did. Maya became that student for him, the one he could pass that gift forward to. Now, as the board members shuffled their papers and cleared their throats, Maya understood this wasn't really about wasted resources. It was about discomfort with seeing someone like her excel in spaces where she wasn't expected. Professor Henderson's greatest sin wasn't poor judgment, it was defying their narrow expectations. The board chairman, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. His voice carried false sympathy when he spoke. Professor Henderson, we understand your intentions were noble, but the school must allocate resources efficiently. Perhaps this young lady's talents would be better served in other programs more suited to her background. Maya watched Professor Henderson's jaw tighten. His hands, which could coax the most beautiful sounds from a cello, clenched into fists at his sides. But before he could respond, Maya stood up. The scraping of her chair against the floor echoed through the room. All eyes turned to her. She could feel her heart pounding, but she lifted her chin and met their stares. "May I play something?" she asked quietly. The board members exchanged glances. The chairman waved his hand dismissively. "I don't think that's necessary." "I insist," Professor Henderson said firmly. "If you're going to judge my decisions, you should hear the result." After a long pause, the chairman nodded reluctantly. Maya raised her violin to her shoulder. The familiar weight brought comfort. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Professor Henderson had taught her that music wasn't just notes on a page, it was emotion made audible, stories told without words. She chose Dvorak's Going Home, a piece that always made her think of longing and belonging, of searching for a place where you're accepted for who you are. Her bow touched the strings, and the first notes floated into the air like prayers. The melody started soft and tender, each note carefully shaped and sustained. Maya poured everything into that performance, every doubt she'd overcome, every tear she'd shed, every moment of joy when she finally mastered a difficult passage. She played for Professor Henderson, who'd given her a gift beyond measure. She played for herself, for the girl who'd been afraid to dream too big. As the piece swelled, her playing grew more confident, more powerful. The music filled every corner of the room, wrapping around the board members whether they wanted it to or not. She could feel them leaning forward despite themselves, caught in the emotional current of her performance. When she reached the final notes, she let them ring out long and clear before gently lowering her bow. Silence followed, so complete that Maya could hear her own breathing. Then Professor Henderson began to clap. The sound startled the others, but slowly, one by one, they joined him. Even the chairman's hands came together, though his face remained troubled. Maya looked at Professor Henderson. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, and he was smiling with such pride that Maya felt her own eyes water. In that moment, she understood that their connection transcended this room, this judgment, this small-minded resistance to seeing her as she truly was. The chairman cleared his throat. That was quite accomplished, he admitted grudgingly. However, it doesn't change the fundamental question of resource allocation. Professor Henderson stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. Gentlemen, I have taught music for 45 years. I have worked with hundreds of students, many of them talented. But Maya Richardson has something rare, something that cannot be taught. She has the ability to make people feel, to communicate truth through her instrument. Denying her the opportunity to develop that gift would be the real waste. He paused, looking at each board member in turn. I invested my time, not school resources beyond the normal program budget. I stayed after hours because I chose to, because I recognized something extraordinary. If you cannot see that, then perhaps the problem lies not with my judgment, but with your vision. The room fell silent again. Maya watched the board members shift uncomfortably. She realized that Professor Henderson had just put his career on the line for her, and the weight of that sacrifice pressed against her heart. The chairman tapped his pen against the table. We'll take your comments under advisement, Professor Henderson. This meeting is adjourned. As the board members filed out, Maya approached her teacher. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens, Maya, promise me you'll keep playing. The world needs your music. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. 3 weeks later, the board issued their decision. Professor Henderson would receive a formal reprimand for his letter, but no further action would be taken. It was a compromise that satisfied no one but changed everything. Because Maya's performance had been recorded by a board member's assistant, and that recording found its way onto social media. Within days, it had been shared thousands of times. Letters poured into the school from musicians, educators, and community members praising both Maya's talent and Professor Henderson's dedication. The attention brought opportunities. Maya received a full scholarship to a prestigious summer music program. A renowned violinist offered to mentor her. Doors that had seemed permanently closed began to open. But the greatest gift remained unchanged. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Maya still met Professor Henderson in the music room. They worked through increasingly challenging pieces, shared quiet conversations about life and art, and built a friendship that transcended age, race, and circumstance. Years later, when Maya performed as the youngest member of a major symphony orchestra, she always mentioned Professor Henderson in her interviews. She talked about the teacher who saw potential where others saw limitations, who chose kindness over prejudice, who proved that believing in someone can change their entire life. And Professor Henderson, watching from the audience with tears in his eyes, knew that his 4 decades of teaching had been worth every moment. Because in the end, it only takes one student, one connection, one opportunity seized, to make all the difference. Maya's music floated through concert halls around the world, but she never forgot the empty music room where it all began, where the silver-haired teacher whose hands had guided hers, whose faith had lifted her higher than she ever dreamed possible. That was the real performance, the one that mattered most, 2 souls connecting across differences, proving that compassion and talent can flourish anywhere when given the chance.